Good morning, everyone. My name is Alan, and I'm excited to present our project Smart Cities, Clean Mobility, the future of public transport and EV charging. As cities expand, we must address two critical challenges: reducing carbon emissions and enhancing mobility efficiency. The study evaluates how electrification of public transport and optimized EV charging infrastructure can transform urban mobility. Let's have a look at what we'll be covering today. Start off with the executive summary and the introduction, move on to the approach and methodology used in our data driven analysis, see our findings, and end the presentation with the appendix. Executive summary. Cities worldwide are shifting towards sustainable transport solutions. Our study focuses on two key initiatives. Initiative number one being public transport electrification. Our goal is to move from a diesel based economy to an electric based one. The benefits of this are significant CO2 reduction, optimized costs, enhanced connectivity. The second initiative is EV charging initiative. The goal is to reduce our reliance on fully grid connected chargers and incorporate fewer grid connected chargers by introducing a secondary source of power like solar power to cut energy costs and emissions and making EV infrastructure more sustainable. By investing in a future ready transport and EV infrastructure, we're not just adapting, we're leading the charge towards a cleaner, smarter, and more connected urban future. Few key takeaways of the overall project is its financial feasibility, it supports sustainable urban growth, and a data driven impactful strategy. Introduction. DevCo is planning on building a sustainable city that prioritizes low carbon transportation, energy efficient infrastructure, and accessible urban mobility. As a part of this vision, the city aims to achieve a 40% public transport mode share through electrification of public buses, expand EV and hybrid parking spaces from 5% to 15% by 2050, while reducing reliance on fully grid connected chargers for more sustainable energy mix. To meet these goals, our project focuses on two key mobility transformation initiatives. Like I said earlier, electrifying public transport and optimizing EV charging infrastructure. Shift towards sustainable mobility following the SCR framework. Situation. The diesel powered buses still dominate public transport worldwide, leading to high CO2 emissions and operational costs. EV infrastructure is underdeveloped with limited parking spaces and charging stations, making it difficult to accelerate the shift towards electric mobility. Complications. Heavy reliance on diesel transport leads to air pollution, fluctuating fuel prices, and long term sustainability concerns. 100% grid dependent EV charging increases the electricity demand, resulting in higher energy costs and infrastructure strain. Without alternative energy integration, EV adoption faces barriers and charging networks become increasingly costly to maintain. Solutions for this are public transport electrification, solar integrated EV charging, scalable smart infrastructure. Through public transport electrification and solar integrated EV charging, DevCo is shaping a future ready city, one that is smarter, cleaner, and more resilient. The study compares conventional diesel based transport and fully grid dependent charging with modern electrification and solar integration using net present value and marginal abatement cost analysis to assess the financial feasibility and environmental impact. By leveraging data driven insights, we ensure that sustainability is not only achievable but also economically viable. Approach and methodology. Initiative 1: Public Transport. We compare the business as usual scenario, which is diesel buses, with our initiative, which is electric buses. The scale of public transport system was determined based on the 40% mode share. We estimated the capex, opex, and CO2 emissions for both the BAU and the initiative. After that, we conducted the NPV and MAC analysis to understand the financial feasibility and economic impact of the initiative compared to the business as usual scenario. High level processes and key outcomes. Step number one of public transport is to figure out the number of bus stops required in the small city. We made three assumptions. We assumed that 20% of land area was given to roads. The average road width is about 10 meters and there's a bus stop every 400 meters. Based on these calculations, we understood there would be about 1028 bus stops in this city. Step number two is to figure out the type of bus stops we have. We've implemented a mix of AC shelters in high traffic areas and minimal facility stops elsewhere for efficiency. We assume that 68% of bus stops will be mid-tier bus stops and 32% of bus stops will be premium bus stops. Step number 3 is number of trips. According to SAPCO's current timings, a bus in Saudi Arabia works about for 18 hours, and which each trip being around 30 minutes, there will be a 1 hour break. Based on this, each bus will take approximately 34 trips per day. Step number 4 was one of the most crucial steps. We had to calculate the number of buses required. Since we assume 40% of the people use public transport, we took 40% of the mobility data. After that, we calculated the required daily distance and assumed that each bus travels about 250 kilometers per day. Based on that, we came up with the number 1399 buses required. Step number 5 was choosing the bus models. For both cases, we chose buses from Yutong as it has a strong presence in the Saudi Arabian market. And for the electric bus, we took E12 Pro, and for the diesel bus, we took ZK6126HG. Number 6 and step number 7 are crucial to identify the charging needs of the bus. We assume that each bus travels about 250 kilometers per day. Based on that, we calculate the daily energy demanded by each bus, and we decided to on two types of chargers required for the buses. We assumed 150 kilowatt chargers at the depots and 300 kilowatt chargers at various bus stops across the city. We assume that 80% of the buses would use the depot chargers and 20% of the buses would use superchargers. In step number 8, we calculated the number of charging depots required to house these 1399 buses and also calculated the number of depot chargers we would require and the superchargers. Also, similarly, we calculated the number of fueling depots required for diesel buses and also how many fueling pumps would be required to fuel all the buses. Step number 10 and 11 was done to calculate the CO2 emissions of both the initiative and the BAU scenario of diesel buses. Step number 12 and 13, we calculate the capex of the initiative and the BAU. For the initiative, the cost of the electric buses, the costs of premium bus stops, mid-tier bus stops, charging depots, and depot chargers and superchargers were considered. Similarly, for the BAU, the cost of diesel buses, the cost of premium bus stops, mid-tier bus stops, and fueling depots were considered. Also, for both cases, the lifespan of the assets were also considered. Bus stop upgrades and cost of replacing electric buses and chargers were also considered. Step number 14 and 15, we calculate the OPEX of initiative and the BAU. The major difference comes in the electricity costs of buses and fuel expenses for the buses. Other than that, all the remaining costs are same for both scenarios. Initiative 2, EV charging. We compare the BAU case, which is fully grid connected chargers, with our initiative solar integrated EV chargers. We assume the land area of one parking space is about 15 meters square, and after that, we estimated the capex, opex, and CO2 emissions for both the BAU and the initiative. After that, we conducted the MPV and MAC analysis to identify the financial feasibility and environmental impact of each initiative. Number one of EV charging is very crucial. It is to calculate the number of parking spaces. We make two assumptions. We assume that 5% of total land area is left for parking spaces, and a space of one parking space would be about 15,000 meters square. And after doing a calculation, we understand there are 68,000 parking spaces available within the city from 2027. Step number 2 is to calculate the number of parking spaces based on pathways, as we are required to increase the number of EV parking spaces throughout the lifetime of the project. We had to calculate at the start of each pathway how much parking spaces was required. Step number 3 was to calculate the number of solar panels that can fit in one parking space. Since we assume 15 meters square is the area of one parking space and the roofing structure above it can hold approximately 6 solar panels per parking space. Step number 4 and 5 is dealing with solar panels. Step number 4 deals with how much electricity we are saving per day per parking space, when we estimated it to be about 12 kilowatt per day. And step number 5 is to calculate the number of solar panels required per for pathway 1. For instance, it would be, since we required 3,400 EV parking spaces for pathway 1, we would require 20,400 solar panels. This step number 6 and step number 7 is to calculate the CO2 emissions for the initiative and CO2 emissions for the BAU. Overall carbon emissions per charger was about 20.3 ton of CO2 emissions, which is lower than the BAU because of the additional electricity generated by the solar panels. And we can see that overall 2 ton of CO2 is more in the BAU scenario per charger. Number 8 and 9 is to calculate the capex for the initiative and the BAU. The capex for the initiative was calculated by adding solar carport cost with EV charging cost. Key costs in the solar carport included cost of solar panels, structural costs such as steel structures, mounting systems, foundation and footings, engineering and permitting, and hybrid inverters. Key costs of the EV charging stations included clearing, grading, drainage system, asphalt and concrete paving, line stripping, signage and installation, and permits and fixtures. Step number 9, capex for the BAU, has all similar figures except the solar panels. The OPEX for the initiative and the BAU for EV charging. The OPEX was calculated using the electricity cost of solar parking spaces and the maintenance cost of solar parking spaces. Electricity costs included the overall energy consumption and the electricity tariff. Maintenance cost included the cost of regular cleaning, inspection, inverter maintenance, and other expenses like insurance. OPEX of the BAU was also similar with higher overall energy consumption because the solar panels were not included. Similar expenses were also included for electricity cost. Maintenance cost included regular inspection costs and repairs, insurance, and administrative costs. Findings: CO2 emissions of public transport. We can see that from the start of the project till 2050 or pathway 3, that at all times the CO2 emissions of BAU, which is diesel buses, is so much higher than that of initiative being electric buses, which shows that in long term always electrification is better for the environment. Overall, the emissions abated by using electric buses throughout the project is about 600,000 tons of carbon dioxide is being abated. Capex public transport. When we look at the capex graph for public transport, we can see at all point of time the initiative's capex is much higher than that of the BAU, which is diesel buses. This also tells us that there's a net cost when we take net cost of capex when we take the initiative over the BAU. OPEX public transport. When we look at the graph of the OPEX for public transport, we can see that opposite to the capex, at all point of time the BAU's OPEX is much higher than that of the initiative. This tells us that there's a net savings of OPEX when we take the initiative over the BAU. Findings and conclusion of public transport. After conducting the MPV and MAC analysis, we find out the initiative is financially viable and falls within the low to high cost range of the marginal abatement cost curve. Even though the capex for electric buses is higher than the capex of diesel buses, the OPEX throughout is lesser than that of diesel buses. As a result, the net OPEX savings compensate for the net capex cost, hence driving a positive NPV for Initiative 1. Also, the emissions abated are more than 600,000 tons of CO2. The marginal abatement cost comes out to a high cost of 4,196 Saudi riyals to reduce 1 ton of CO2. CO2 emissions EV charging. Similar to our initiative 1, the BAU's CO2 emissions throughout the life of the project is higher than that of the initiative, which shows that in the long term a high amount of CO2 emissions will be abated by adopting the initiative. Capex of EV charging. When we look at the graph of the capex for EV charging, we can see that throughout the life of the project that the capex for the initiative is higher than that of the BAU. This will lead to a net capex cost of EV charging. OPEX of EV charging. Similar to Initiative 1, the OPEX for the initiative is much lower than that of the BAU, and this will lead to a long-term net OPEX savings, which will overall create a positive NPV. In conclusion, for EV charging, similar to Initiative 1, this initiative is also financially viable and falls within the low to high cost range in the marginal abatement cost curve. The capex for the initiative is higher, but the opex throughout for the initiative is lower than that of the BAU, which results in a positive NPV for initiative 2 as well. The emissions abated are more than 590,000 tons of CO2, and the marginal abatement cost gives the calculation of 170 Saudi Arabian riyals to reduce 1 ton of CO2. Appendix extracts MAC analysis. When we compare our initiatives to the graph provided by BH, we can see that both our initiatives fall under the low to high cost initiatives to abate CO2 emissions. Public transport electrification has a high cost but delivers the greatest emissions reduction, making it long-term sustainable investment. Solar EV charging is low cost initiative that reduces grid reliance but supports EV adoption with minimal infrastructure upgrades. Assumptions used in calculations for public transport. Buses, bus stops, charging and fueling depots all were introduced in accordance with the increase in mobility and build out area each year and maximizing by 2035. From 2039 onwards, all buses will be replaced each year at the same rate they were introduced, ensuring a continuous renewal cycle. In 2038, all bus stops will receive upgrades at 25% of their initial cost to extend their lifespan. All depot chargers and superchargers will be replaced in 2038 to keep up with advancing technology, with another potential upgrade in 2051 if needed. Fuel pumps at all five fueling depots will be replaced in 2038 with another potential replacement in 2051 if diesel buses are still operational. This structured replacement and upgrade plan ensures long-term efficiency, cost control, and infrastructure modernization throughout the project timeline. Other assumptions include the bus models taken were taken from Yutong as they have a strong presence in the Saudi Arabian market, and then estimated fuel efficiency of a Euro 6 bus was taken as 38 liters per 100 kilometers. It also takes about 2.47 hours for a bus to charge using a depot chargers, whereas only 1.24 hours to charge using a supercharger. It also takes 12 minutes to fuel one bus, and 90 buses can be fueled up using one pump in a day, and two drivers will be required per bus. Also, exchange rate used for USD upon Saudi Arabian Riyal is 1 USD is equal to 3.5 Saudi Arabian Riyals. Assumptions used in calculations for EV charging. Land allocation. 5% of total land area will be designated for parking spaces. Initial parking capacity. The project starts with 2,625 parking spaces. Exchange rate again assumed at 1 USD is equal to 3.5 Saudi Arabian Riyals. Until 2027, the number of parking spaces will expand in proportion to increase in the build out area. After 2027, the pathway 1 parking spaces will grow at the rate of 1% per year. For pathway 2 until 2025, the growth rate of EV parking spaces would increase by 0.5% per year. Cost estimation, all capex and opex calculation are based on industry average assumptions. EV chargers have a lifespan of 10 years. From 2036 onwards, all chargers will be replaced with new models as they reach the end of their lifespan. Public transport. The projected 2035 population is 30 million with the build out area of only 20.55 kilometers square. This results in an extremely high density of 1.47 million people per kilometer square, which is far beyond from real urban densities. Manila, which is one of the densest cities, have only 43,000 per kilometer square. Such a high density does not realistically reflect transport demand. Assuming 40% of the population, which is about 12 million of people, use public transport, led to an estimated need of over 6,000 buses. This is not operationally feasible due to infrastructure constraints and depot space and economic efficiency. This figure seemed unrealistic, and as a result, our main calculations were made revolving around build out area and mobility vehicle kilometer data. Meet the team who designed this project. Arvin and Jonathan are our researchers. Juita and Neil are our analysts. And Sushma was a computer geek. And I myself, Alan, I'm the writer. And with this, we conclude our presentation and move on to any questions.